in a Baptist Christian home and actually studied to be a minister when his studies led him to leave the faith. He presently hosts a show, a cable access television show in Austin, Texas called The Atheist Experience. And we have the link for that up in our banner, www.atheist-experience.com. Their next show is August the 11th, and actually the show is geared toward a non-atheist audience. The show is produced by the Atheist Community of Austin, and I'm thankful for Matt to give us his time to be here with us tonight. You guys make him feel welcome. He is going to be primarily doing Q&A. He's going to introduce himself and maybe fill in any gaps that I may not have said in announcing him, and then take Q&A from the room for an undetermined period of time. Now, Matt, whenever you get ready to wrap it up, just say, I'll take one more question or what have you, and we'll go ahead and say goodnight to you whenever you're ready to wrap it up. But feel free to hang out with us as long as you like and chat with us. Mic is free. Go ahead and take the mic for us, Matt. Mic is free.
All right.
Oop, you dropped the mic there, Matt. Right by the talk button, there's a little circle with an arrow pointing down. If you click on that, you can click lock the mic. So if you lock the mic, you'll stay keyed up. And I pass the mic back to you.
Yeah, I pushed the lock the mic. Hopefully it'll stay. It says I'm talking, so I'm assuming people can hear. All right, so as was mentioned, I host the Atheist Experience TV show. I was on the Nonprofits, which is another podcast that we produce for a number of years. That's back, by the way. Jeff D. has brought that back. They're now doing it from our new building. They posted their first episode, I think, on Wednesday, and they're doing just like 2 a month. I was a fundamentalist Christian, predominantly Southern Baptist in most of my upbringing, although I occasionally did go to Pentecostal churches mainly because they had better music. So when I was growing up and active in the church in the 80s, I don't know how many other Christians are here or former Christians are here that were active then, but bands like Petra and Carmen and stuff, they would go to the Pentecostal churches, and so that's where we went for good concerts after we burned all of our secular music. But I was in the military for 8 years, or a little over 8 years, excuse me. And moved to Austin, Texas. I'm originally from Missouri and worked in the tech industry for a number of years. And around 2000 or so, I was laid off and found myself with a bunch of time, enough money where I didn't need to work, and did not want anything to do with the tech industry at all at that point. And throughout my entire upbringing, I had been convinced that God wanted me to be a minister, and I'm pretty sure there were a lot of other people, including my mom, who was convinced of that as well. And so around that time, I just decided, okay, you've been running from this calling for so many years, in part because I was terrified of public speaking, in part because even though I had been active in the church and active in ministry opportunities and had done the typical normal witnessing, I was never super Christian, I was not the Bible thumping youth group leader, but I was pretty serious about it for most of my upbringing, and I just said, God, if you wanted me to be a minister, then that's actually what I'll do. So I spent about 1.5 years in pretty intense study and prayer, and spoke. My uncle was a former medical missionary, and I had a conversation with him about morality and witnessing to atheists and things. And my roommate at the time was an atheist. He still is. He's not my roommate anymore, but he's still an atheist. We've been friends for, forever, 15, 16, 17 years or more. And he doesn't really care that much about the subject. I mean, he supports my efforts and everything, but he's not involved. He's got better things to do with his life than worry about the God question and arguing and debating with theists. Whereas I actually enjoy it. I find it not only rewarding for me, but I think it's a valuable discussion to have. So I'm glad to be here today. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks so many people for showing up. But my goal at the time, we had agreed that we weren't going to have conversations about religion, that I believed what I believed, he believed what he believed, and our friendship was more important than our disagreement over whether or not a God existed. And when I got serious about this, my goal was to change that, because, coming from my background, if I was going to truly surrender to the Lord and be a minister, then His soul would be on my head. How could I possibly, appear before Jesus and say, hey, I didn't really care that much about, the best friend who I loved as much as any brother, but I didn't care enough to actually witness to him and try to save him. And so part of my studies were directed specifically at addressing atheists. And this all seems very strange to me now, because when I would go out, when I was active in the church and we would go out for Monday night visitation or we would be witnessing, we were always witnessing to non-believers. And somehow in my head, non-believer was different from atheist. And I think there may be some subtle difference there, but really there's not. In the loosest sense, an atheist is somebody who doesn't believe in a God. Now, what their reasons are may be varied. There are probably atheists who are atheists for bad reasons, and others who are atheists for good reasons, and others who are atheists for no reason at all, maybe. But it never clicked to me that I had actually engaged with atheists, and I think the big difference is that predominantly when somebody self-identifies as an atheist, there's more of a conscious rejection of. Doesn't mean it's identical to I believe there are no gods. It's not an acceptance of the opposite proposition, but it is usually a thoughtful, positive affirmation that you're rejecting this claim. And the process of actually, kind of studying this in the hopes of being a good witness to my roommate backfired spectacularly. And over the course of a few months, I had a number of little crises of faith, and would say, hey God, I'm here, I'm trying to do what it is that you want me to do, but this is starting to make much more sense. And why is it that every time we start talking about arguments for the existence of God, when the opposition points out fallacies in those arguments, there actually are fallacies? Why isn't there better evidence? I mean, my thought process was, I am here to fulfill my obligation under 1 Peter 3:15, to give the reason, and the word used there is one that I viewed as a logical reason, and not just a testimony, and not just a pointing to a personal relationship with Jesus, but to give reasons. The God that I believed in is one that was real and could be demonstrated, and should be one that you should be able to demonstrate rather trivially. And it's because I was raised around, everybody around me believed, and this is just something it just never even occurred to me to question for the vast majority of my life. Is it possible that this is not true? I've just gone with this assumption that it is. And I've stood in church, and I've felt what I thought was, the Holy Spirit, and I've seen things that people described as miraculous, or the workings of God. I don't think I ever saw anything that I would truly consider miraculous in any sense, but things along those lines. And so you're growing up in this culture where this is real to everybody. And so when you're standing in a church and you have just finished singing a hymn, and everyone is praising, and you feel this euphoric sensation, and you've got goosebumps, and the hair stands up on your arms, and you feel just absolutely wonderful, and everybody around you is saying that this feeling that you're feeling is the Holy Spirit, then it becomes real to you that is the explanation. And it occurred to me, what right do we have to claim the source of this phenomenon? I mean, everybody's saying, oh, this is the Holy Spirit, but is it really? And how did they know that it really was? Or did they just come to believe that it was for the same reason that I did, which is everybody around me said, oh, of course, it's the Holy Spirit. That's what you're feeling. And it's like a label we put on those feelings. And in the course of, living out in the real world, I had that feeling or similar feelings from all sorts of things, from secular music that I supposedly shouldn't have been listening to, and sex, drugs, you name it. There's a number of different ways to have the same types of sensations. None of them are identical, and I wouldn't claim that the sort of euphoric sensation that one gets from sex is identical to what I would feel in church after singing. That would be a little silly. But the thing is, the quality of those experiences is comparable. And since this is something that's clearly produced by a brain, I don't see a justification for adding something else to it. That, along with a great many other things, the time I spent in the Navy, introducing me to people who believed differently from the way that I believed, and just the primary thing was I made a conscious decision to care about truth and not just assume that I had it. I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible, and that means I need some kind of mechanism for distinguishing what's true from what's false. And I won't claim that that any particular God claim is false unless you've defined a God in along the lines of a square circle, something that we could actually disprove. But I just don't find that any of them have met their burden of proof, and given the propensity for human beings to invent explanations or to fallaciously assert causation, solving mysteries by appealing to bigger mysteries, I just couldn't, in good conscience, continue to believe. I didn't ever get mad at God. I didn't ever have anything bad happen to me. I mean, I do have one remaining grandparent right now. My other three grandparents have died, but these weren't traumatic experiences that made me, oh God, why did you take the? I just didn't have any experiences like that. My only goal was really to serve God as best I could, and to be intellectually honest, and to apply skepticism and critical thinking in order to make sure that my internal model of reality is as accurate as it can possibly be. And the process of applying that led to a point where I could no longer say, yes, I'm a Christian, or yes, I believe these things. I had to stop doing that. I wasn't necessarily identifying as an atheist, but I wasn't a Christian. And I started investigating other religions to see what could be true, and I realized this could take forever, longer than I had. So I jokingly said that I should start with the religions that include claims about reincarnation, so I can figure out whether or not I've got more than one life to investigate this process. But ultimately, I decided that it would be much more efficient to stop investigating each individual religion and go to the underlying questions and spend more time studying philosophy and science and epistemology and the way to figure out what sort of questions I needed to ask to best guide my pursuit of truth. And ultimately, I found that there wasn't any good reason to believe any of the God claims or claims of that category, that the limitations of what we can determine about supernatural causation are such that it's a vain exercise, really. We can certainly test for phenomenon in a God that might manifest in reality, and we've done that. We've tested intercessory prayer, which succeeds at roughly the rate of chance, unless it turns out people know you're praying for them, and then it actually is slightly worse than chance in at least one study. But that's kind of the process that I went to, and then there wasn't a day where I had this epiphany, oh, I'm an atheist now. But I do remember a day when my roommate and I were driving home from work, and I said, I think I had gone back to work at this time. I think I'm kind of an agnostic now. And he said, oh, cool. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. Shortly after that, I began writing for some defunct or no longer worth reading websites. And I had a bit of fun with that because it allowed me to kind of engage with other people who had the beliefs that I used to have. I stumbled across the atheist experience thanks to some people at work. It just happens, maybe it was, a godsend maybe, that I lived in the same town as the only live call-in television show devoted to atheism and discussing religious beliefs, and I got involved with the show. We started streaming it live over the internet. It took off and got quite popular. I've been doing it for about 8 years, and the past 3 or 4 years, I've been engaged in a number of debates and speaking engagements. Next weekend I'll be in New Orleans and then Nebraska for Apostacon, where I'll actually be doing a magic show. I've done magic my entire life. I tried to make a go of it for a little while in my late teens, but I really didn't have an interest in doing birthday parties. But as I put together about an hour-long show that talks about teaching, no, I'm not a witch, that talks about teaching skepticism and critical thinking, and the fact that we can all be fooled, and uses magic and mentalism to kind of touch on that. But I live on live TV where I take questions and interact. When I give talks at conventions and for groups, I very rarely give lengthy prepared talks. I didn't prepare anything for today because I love the interaction and the Q&A. And so I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions, and I can't promise exactly how long I'll stay here. It will go to at least 8 o'clock Central, 9 Eastern. It may go longer, who knows? But ask away, and I'm not exactly sure how I go about this other than picking somebody with their hand raised. Is that the story there? So Glee, I guess. Go ahead. I can't see all of it there. Glee Klein fanboy.
Sorry, Matt. Only one person can have the mic at a time, so you'll just have to release it whenever you want them to speak. So we'll go ahead and let. Now, was Glee going to go next? I got a PM. I don't know if we're going to let Glee go next or Shotgun. But anyway, go ahead, Glee, and go ahead, Glee.
Okay, first, allow me to say thank you for being here, Matt. Thank you very much. But my question for you, Matt, is what is your personal position on a historical Jesus? Do you believe that there was a historical Jesus? I just want your position on it. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Okay. Thanks a lot for the question. And I apologize if I've broken the order or whatever. Matter of fact, it'd probably be best if you're willing to, Wendy, you just pick whoever and send him the question next, since you know more about what you're doing. So, what's my personal position on a historical Jesus? I really haven't. I don't have any. Well, I don't have a lot of positions that are actually set in stone. I have tentative positions on things, and so I'm working through Ehrman's book on the subject, and I'm also waiting. My friend Richard Carrier is getting ready to release a book on it that uses Bayesian analysis to determine the probability that Jesus existed. Right now, I think it very much depends on what we mean. So there's a number of different possibilities. When I say, did George Washington actually exist? Well, I'm okay with saying yes, in fact, he did. But what I would do is I would list all of the stories and claims that I identify with that person, and the question of whether or not that person existed is far less important to me than whether or not the individual stories that I attribute to that person that make up this internal model of that person. So, if all we knew of George Washington was the cherry tree story, which I don't believe, which I don't think hardly anybody believes. But if that's all we knew, then it doesn't make much difference to me whether or not George Washington actually believed, because if the only story I know about him most probably isn't true, or we don't know anything of value, it doesn't matter much. It's like people will talk about, do you believe that Socrates existed? Because, it could have been an invention. And somebody asked me this on Twitter the other day, and I said, does it matter? Does Socrates' existence mean anything? Do I have to believe this in order to accomplish something, or can his words be assessed on their own? So right now my position is that I think it's probably likely that there was someone, maybe a single person, maybe the stories are about several people, but I'm okay with the idea that maybe there was a single person. But I don't know much of anything at all reliably about that individual. The actual stories that go into this character, Most of them, not only see no good reason to believe, I think are probably more than likely false. I'm not just dismissing miracles out of hand, but when I put together this whole package, if there was somebody who existed, we know next to nothing about them, and what we do know isn't really relevant. So I'm waiting for Richard's book before I kind of say yes, I'm a mythicist of one stripe or another, or no, I think there was a historical Jesus. But it matters less to me than whether or not the actual stories about that person are real. Hope that answered your question.
Okay, were we going to let Shotgun go next? I'm a little confused. I had gotten a PM. Are we letting Shotgun go next? I'm not sure. Anyway, go ahead, King James Bible. I'll get to the bottom of this. Go ahead, King James.
Yeah, thanks, Wanda, and welcome to the room, Matt. I just got a question. You were saying that actually your whole introduction was becoming from a Christian to an atheist. I've heard that a lot from some atheists. So you said did you change faith, but what criteria is it based on other than just an ideology of a mind change? And if so, Christians, like I'm a Christian, I believe it's not based on just your thought processes. It's based on not feelings, but it's based on the actual Son of God. So my question to you then would be, what is your criteria for changing your mind? Or is it based on limited to the mind, or do you have other criteria that you're using to say that you were once a Christian and no longer a Christian? So I'll hop off the mic and you can answer. Thanks.
Sure, thanks for the question. You actually broke up for a minute, and I thought I was going to have to ask you to restate it, but you kind of did. So interesting to me is that you say that your criteria is based on the actual Son of God. And my first response to that would be, if I was aware of an actual Son of God, well, there you've got some good criteria. I don't accept the claims that there was a Son of God or a God. Somebody actually mentioned this to me today in Twitter. I have lots of little conversations and said, well, the evidence is the Scriptures and Christ, and I'm like, okay, we'll produce a Christ. Well, we can't actually do that, so you're left with the Scriptures. And so when you say that it's based on an actual Son of God, I'm not aware of any actual Son of God or any actual gods. To the question about what will change my mind, I used to give answers that I now consider kind of glib and useless. I still think that perhaps the presentation of a world-shattering miracle would certainly be something that would put us in a position where we'd have to perhaps have more good reasons to at least accept the sorts of claims that we're talking about. Writing in the sky that everybody could read. But that's not my answer. Because I think all those are arrogant. It is pretty arrogant of me to presume that I can tell evidence for a God, that I can distinguish this from some super powerful force, to Arthur C. Clarke's, sufficiently advanced technologies indistinguishable from magic. So my answer for what would it take to change my mind is, I don't know, but anything that would qualify as a God should know exactly what it would take to change my mind and should be capable of doing so. And the fact that this hasn't happened is a clear demonstration that either this God does not exist or this God does not care about changing my mind. There are theists in a debate that I had. It happens a lot, but it happened once in a public debate, and I was so glad that I was able to address it, because it's very insulting for people to pretend that they know you and say, well, you just didn't try hard enough, or you weren't honest enough in your heart when you were seeking God, or you need to do this again, or you need to come to it humbly. No offense, and I don't know what the language limitations are here, but screw you if that's what you think, because any God, I know what I tried, and I know what I've been through. And if there is a God, that God knows what I've been through and knows that I've been honest and sincere in the pursuit. And when you've got, Jim Bob out in the middle of nowhere who is getting a revelation from God, and what makes me any less valuable than that? What makes me any less valuable than, the Damascus Road experience for Saul? I don't know what would change my mind, but God does and should be able to do it and hasn't. And incidentally, this was one of the ways that I kind of worked out a solution with my parents, because my parents are, they're fundamentalist Christians, and they are grieving over the loss of their son, the fact that I'm not only going to hell, but evidently leading people to hell as well. And they felt like they had failed me spiritually, and what I told them was, you believe in God, you believe God answers prayer, you believe that God wants me to know that He exists, and so all you need to do is just pray for God to reveal Himself to me. You know me, you know I'm the type of person who's not going to be convinced by 1,000 personal testimonies, but I'm not going to deny a real, demonstration of reality from God. And this kind of took the weight off of their shoulders and put it back on God, so that they don't feel responsible anymore. I hope that answered your question.
Anyway, welcome to the room, Matt. To ease the tension, there was a ham sandwich, walked to a bar, bartender said, "Sorry, pal, we don't serve food here." But anyway, because I'm the stirrer of controversy, I'm going to let Shotgun Smith onto the mic to ask the question. Your mic, Shotgun.
Wow, I really appreciate that. And by the way, I would just like to thank Mr. Matt Dillahunty for coming to the chat room and speaking with us this evening. Hoo-yah from a fellow 10-year Navy vet. I though, am, unlike you, Mr. Dillahunty, I am a Christian. And so I'd have a few questions for you. I guess just one that I was curious about, and it kind of piggybacks off of what King James said on the mic just now. But in my experience as a Christian apologist, I'll talk to young, naive atheists who perhaps are not as sophisticated in their views as they could be, maybe 14, 15-year-old atheists. And when I refute their views, they do not give up their atheism. They try to become more and more intellectually sophisticated in their atheism. And so instead of giving it up, they stick to it emotionally and try to find something else to defend their position with. And I'm just wondering if you did that with your, or maybe if you could, I'm wondering maybe if you could expound on your journey on your deconversion. Did you give up Christianity after having some simplistic versions of it criticized? Or did you seek really thorough, sophisticated, systematic defenses of your position and systematic Christian epistemology and really, some of the more sophisticated writings of Christian apologists? Did you seek those out before deconverting, or what? I was just wondering if you could expound on that. And again, thanks again for coming. I appreciate it, and everybody appreciates it. Thank you. I yield the mic.
All right, so thanks. This probably isn't the forum to start getting into a big mic debate, but it's kind of fun to me seeing different people's points of view. And so you talk about you've refuted their views and they don't give up atheism. Instead, they try to find a new way to defend it. And curiously, that's exactly what I think about theologians and apologists, that for as long as religion's been around, that's exactly what they continue to do. I'm not convinced that you may have refuted the views of these other, maybe they had bad arguments, maybe they didn't. I can't speak to what actually, I wasn't there to see. But what we have seen is that when non-theists demonstrate flaws in the logical arguments, let's say the classical ones for the existence of God, instead of giving it up, the theists will instead reformulate and regurgitate a new version of that. That's how we went from the cosmological argument to the Kalam cosmological argument, and how we'll go to whatever comes next. And it's one of the reasons why on the show, when we've had people call in, Jeff D started basically asking, look, we have a limited amount of time to address this, so can you give us your best argument? And then if we refute that, or demonstrate why we don't accept it, you don't get to move on to another one. If your best argument didn't work, you're kind of done. I don't mean that across the board, as in you no longer have a rational. There may be. I can't speak to what your reasons are or what you whether or not you have sufficient evidence to believe. All I can say is that I don't. Asking whether or not I investigated sincerely and deeply and dug into quote sophisticated apologetics. Yes, I did. You can either believe that or not, but I mean, I've spent some time studying this stuff. I didn't. You kind of played it as, did I give up, or did I just give up Christianity as soon as a weak version of it was debunked? I was not seeking to be a non-Christian in the slightest. When the version that I believed could no longer stand, when I had no good reason to believe that, I gave that up. But I did not necessarily give up all belief in God, or all. I specifically went out looking for, maybe my fundamentalist, literalist kind of views were not the right ones. Maybe there was something better. And so I spent some time looking at this. I still do. I mean, I still do Bible studies. I still go to churches. I still engage theists, and I have debates with pretty much anybody. Obviously I can't. I have a day job, so I can't take vacation and do debates against anybody and everybody. But there's not like some theist out there I wouldn't debate. As a matter of fact, I'd be happy to debate William Lane Craig. Unfortunately, he won't debate anybody who doesn't have a PhD, so that's not going to happen. I don't know whether or not you count Craig among sophisticated theologians. Some do, some don't. I don't really care. When I look at this, let's say that there's some sophisticated theology that is actually correct. What does that say about God? What kind of God is it that the best, most convincing evidence that he actually exists and cares about people is something that less than 1% of the people who have ever lived have any hope of actually understanding? If the evidence for the existence of God is at that level, then that God is useless. I mean, that God is immoral. To me, I believed in a God that loved everybody, that was, even though some of them were going to go to hell, but was desperate to make sure that each individual was, I was not a Calvinist, so it wasn't about predestination, but that you could know God, that merely presenting yourself, turning from sin, repenting, being sincere of heart and saying, God, please take my life, reveal to me what you want me to do, lead me, let me be yours, etc. That's all it would take for the truth to be revealed to an individual. Now, when we get to the intellectual demonstration of whether or not a God exists, you begin with Romans 1, where creation alone is evidence for the existence of God. Unfortunately, that is a horrible argument. The arguments from design are all horribly flawed. They don't even seem to understand how we recognize what design is. And what I find from sophisticated theologians, and I use that term kind of loosely, is pretty much been best expressed by P.Z. Myers' courtier's reply, that William Lane Craig's arguments, for example, are not much better than Ray Comfort's. They're just dressed up a little nicer. The core fallacies, the core underlying problems are the same. And the question of whether or not a position is epistemologically sound doesn't change just because Alvin Plantinga comes up with a modologic version of the ontological argument that virtually nobody on the planet is actually going to understand. And actually, to me, if it were correct and demonstrated that a God exists, it tells us a lot more about what kind of a God this is. And it's not the kind of God that I really care to have anything to do with, but I don't find it convincing. And there's a limit to, I'm not going to read every theologian. I am not degreed or sophisticated myself. I'm me. I think the way I think. I investigate things honestly. I try to come up with solid ground on which to base my positions. And if that's not good enough for whatever God existed or exists, tough. Hope that answered your question.
Okay, I just wanted to step in front of DK Man very brief. We don't know if we've got this set up yet, but we had Kevin Harris, who in here who hosts the Reasonable Faith podcast, and he often has William Lane Craig on there, and he said he would talk to him to see if he could get him in here. So if we could get him in here, would you be interested in us letting you know so you could come in here and have the dialogue? Since you said that he won't have a debate with somebody who doesn't have a PhD, maybe you'd be interested in that event. Mike's free.
Sure. I mean, I'm open to it. I have no objections. To be fair, I've never spoken to Craig. I have no reason to think that he knows who I am. I just know, what I've been informed of as to his criteria, and I'd love to have a debate with him. I'd actually like to have, a bigger kind of formal debate. I know he's done some online stuff with Scott Clifton, who's on YouTube. We can certainly work something out.
Yeah, he's actually been on PalTalk before, Theology Web program. I asked him a few questions. Anyway, from your last statement, Matt, it sounds like you're an anti-theist as well as an atheist. But anyway, I'm a former Christian as well, and now primarily agnostic even before I'm an atheist. And my question is kind of twofold. I was wondering, when I watch your atheist experience programs on YouTube, it seems to me that in Austin, Texas, at least, that there's this section of Christians, or I don't know, I think you call it the Bible Belt. Even it's part of the Bible Belt. That just seem to you seem to be very threatened by in terms of what they're doing in politics and how they're affecting science room classrooms and how they're affecting morality in general. And I, as a agnostic who's outside America, I can't really relate to this. So I was wondering if you could tell me, what is the atheist attitude that exists where you live towards Christian evangelicals and such groups. Secondly, is the second part of that question, do you consider Christianity the most dangerous religion on the face of the earth? Now, personally, I'm with Sam Harris on this one, and Bill Mayer and Richard Dawkins, who have all pointed out that compared to certain other religions, Christianity is not really that dangerous. So I'd like to know, which religion specifically do you think is the most dangerous religion? Thanks.
Sure. So thanks for the question. To start off with, yes, depending on the definition of anti-theist, I'm definitely one. I'm an anti-religionist. I actually have a video on my YouTube channel describing how I use the term anti-theist, just because there's some confusion about different usages. And my YouTube channel is youtube.com/sansdeity, SANSDEITY. Although there may be a dot in between there just in case. Hey, you can find it. Austin is in Texas, and Texas is most definitely a red or Republican conservative dominated state. But Austin is this liberal hippie bastion. It's University of Texas here at Austin has 50,000 students. There's a hippie hollow nude beach, and this is a lot of smoke pot, get naked, have a good time. Hippies came here. Willie Nelson created pretty much the live music scene here in Austin, which is one of the reasons why we're known as the live music capital of the world. So it's not quite being in the Bible Belt, but there are a lot of problems. Unfortunately, while Austin isn't Texas, it is part of Texas, and there are theists who are attempting to legislate their personal views onto others, changing textbooks, setting up laws against, with respect to right to choose, with respect to gay marriage, these things which aren't necessarily, they're not atheism, but the predominant reason or justification for a lot of those positions is religious in nature. And I won't say that all atheists are, liberals. It's just not true. But with regard to is Christianity the most dangerous religion on the face of the earth, and if not, what is? Worldwide, I would say that Islam is probably the most dangerous religion on the face of the earth. States, Christianity is the most dangerous religion because the danger is related to how much power and influence it has. Now, and I'm not talking about that they're equivalent in the consequences of danger. I think basically Christianity has been softened. It's been dragged kicking and screaming from the Dark Ages, and we have this wide variety of Christian views. There are plenty of Christians that, in ministers even, that I'm not only friends with, but would actually agree with on the vast majority of things. Just, hey, we disagree on this God thing. There's a minister here in town who I've recently become friends with who thinks that I'm saved. I'm looking forward. We're going to be having dinner soon, and hope I'm weak. Thank you. We're going to be having dinner soon, and I'm hoping to talk to him a little bit more about what that is and what he means by that. But I work with Reverend Barry Land and others, and it's awesome. But the danger is in ideas. Our beliefs inform our actions, and our actions have consequences to ourselves and others. And Voltaire had said that, when you can get people to believe absurdities, you can get them to commit atrocities. And while I think we have pretty much reined in the most blatantly obvious dangers of what Christianity, or what used to be done in the name of Christianity, I'm not going to say what Christianity used to be. I'm not going to get into, whose version is right, because I think they're all wrong. But when you have your foundational beliefs with respect to morality, for example, and you are then going about making decisions about how to live your life, then the fact that there are liberal and moderate theists within Christianity doesn't actually impress me that much, because they quite often will vote right alongside fundamentalists because of the underlying issues. And whether or not I'm correct about the way the world should be is irrelevant to whether or not I perceive it as dangerous. And when we are rewriting textbooks, when we are attacking science, when we are retarding progress, when we are denying condoms to people who are in desperate need of them, and we're promoting the spread of disease and AIDS because somebody is uncomfortable with a prophylactic, because evidently their God is impotent when it comes to a little piece of rubber, and this is a violation of God's law. Thou shalt not put a piece of rubber on your penis to prevent infection because it also happens to prevent pregnancy. Those are dangerous ideas that do a lot of harm. The reason I wouldn't say that Islam is the most dangerous idea in the United States is because they just aren't powerful enough to actually engage in the process and start imposing their views. Is that day coming? Maybe. I don't know. And by the way, I don't want to put every Muslim in the same bucket. I mean, Islam is a religion that I despise, but so is Christianity. And just because I happen to despise individual religions doesn't mean that there aren't people within those religions that I greatly respect and admire and love, and that there aren't people who practice those religions in ways that aren't particularly dangerous. I try not to paint with too broad of a brush, despite the fact that I am directly in opposition to religious ideas. I am anti-religionist. Next.
Hey, Matt. I've got a question because the topic came up about, or the question was asked, what kind of sophisticated, theology did you look into, et cetera, et cetera. What we come across here on PalTalk a lot are not sophisticated apologists, right? We're going to have a lot of people trying to stand on the Bible and respond to us and say that, I'm arguing biblically and that kind of a thing. And it just goes nowhere. You're just talking past each other. But then you have people like Craig, Planting, et cetera, who are making efforts to make logical arguments on common ground. So here's my question, because this is, I like to watch debates, and a couple things have come to my attention. Like, for example, William Lane Craig has gone on record as saying that young Earth creationists are an intellectual embarrassment to the Christian faith. And if I'm not mistaken, he's actually gone on record also as saying that he thinks it's just crazy for someone to think that the Earth is less than 10,000 years old, given the evidence to the contrary. Plantinga has also gone on record as saying there's no problem reconciling the Christian faith with the theory of evolution, because that's something that's really commonly attacked here. And then there's Francis Collins. Obviously, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with him, who's gone as far as to write a book called The Language of God, and to say that, this is scientifically non-negotiable, right? Common ancestry, et cetera, and it cannot be rationally denied by any educated person. So I guess my question to you is, what are your comments or your thoughts on these evangelical Christians taking the tours of universities both here and abroad, arguing for Christianity from a very different kind of perspective, right? I mean, these people are trying to make logical arguments, valid arguments, et cetera, and they're not doing this typical thing that, evolution is just a fairy tale. I'm responding to you biblically. You're an unregenerate. I'm, that kind of a thing and all that business. So I think those are powerful claims that they've put out into the public, and very much in opposition of those people who are trying to defend, straight from the Bible, your Matt Slicks and that kind of a thing. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that. What do you think that move signals for the future? Pass the mic.
Sure, thanks for asking that. I am at least 50% redneck, and certainly I come from a literalist, fundamentalist background, but I'm also a philosophy buff nerd guy who enjoys those sorts of things. So I kind of hit this from all sides. And while I can appreciate, for example, the Catholic Church's position on evolution, it doesn't, to me, exonerate them from some of their other positions. And I like the fact that, Ken Miller is, supportive of evolution, and so is Francis Collins, and that not only have some of them come out and said, young Earth creationism is an intellectual embarrassment, but some of them, there's a quote that I've referenced several times from Francis Collins, and now I realize I'm going to have to go look it up and document it, because I've been using it for so many years and I don't recall the actual source. So if this is incorrect and I've been misled, I apologize, but the way I'm remembering the quote was that Francis Collins had said that even absent any fossil evidence, the genetic evidence alone is sufficient to demonstrate common descent. And with respect to what they're doing, it's kind of twofold. One, it's what we've always seen, which is religions are quite often an attempt to answer questions about what we don't know. And as such, there's a lot of resistance to investigation. It's one of the reasons why I'm opposed to this. Claiming that you have answers that you don't have, it prevents us from going out and finding the actual answers. And so when we go out and we find the answers, and by the way, every single time that we've actually gone out and found an actual answer to a mystery, it has yet to be supernatural, although that may be a bit unfair depending on your position on whether or not the supernatural could ever be an explanation. But the church, and I'm speaking broadly, tends to reject that for a period of time and then accept it and then move to claiming that this was always the case. As a matter of fact, somebody emailed yesterday with, you guys are laughable on your show because you talked about the failure of Scripture and you talked about problems in the Genesis account when you have this, unnuanced view of Genesis, and it's been long demonstrated that Genesis is in complete accord with science, which I find personally laughable. And this is where I'm getting to the answer of your question, which is I find that what they tend to be doing is leading the evidence towards the conclusion they've already reached. They are not going out and doing research and investigating and coming up with, there's a God. They are beginning with, there's a God, and we've used it as an explanation. And so here was this gap in our knowledge where they've stuck a God in, and now we found somebody brave enough to buck the assertion that they had an answer, went out and found an answer, which of course creates two gaps, and now they're going to try and find a way to put those in there. It's this. The individual who mentioned this thing about Genesis matching up with science, the thing that I found really interesting about that is that Genesis did not inform us or lead us towards any scientific information. And the only reason that someone can go back and reread and reinterpret Genesis in such a way that it seems to comport with science is because we went out and did the legwork and figured out from science what the actual answers are. And so going back afterwards to do an interpretation to say that, look, our Bible showed this all the time. Well, even if you were correct, and that really was the intent, which you cannot demonstrate, you have no more basis for saying that your new revised version of Genesis that matches science now is any better than the 15th century interpretation of Genesis that matched the understanding at that time. You have no basis for that. But even if it was true, the Bible was absolutely useless with regard to our discovery of the actual facts. So we go out and we do the legwork and we find out reality, and then somebody comes back and says, oh, this was in the Bible all the time. Well, then why didn't you tell us that 1,500 years ago? Why were you wrong then? Why weren't you telling all of those alchemists back then, no, you've got this all wrong, and inform us all about the germ theory of disease, for example? And so that's kind of what I see coming from some of them. Religious people aren't stupid. And apologists aren't stupid. There are some incredibly intelligent, brilliant people, and I would love to just say that we have a difference of opinion, but I think it's a little deeper than that. We have differences in preconceptions, differences in the sort of epistemological foundations of what we're going to accept, where the burden of proof is, and what constitutes sufficient evidence to justify actually accepting that a claim is true. And so I see them kind of moving along those lines. I'm optimistic that religion, will someday be about as popular as flat Earth, which, by the way, evidently there's still flat earthers. And I found out there are still evidently people who claim to believe in Zeus. All you have to do is have a TV show and claim that nobody believes in Zeus anymore, and all of a sudden you hear from people who they swear to be sincere, and I can't get in their head. But I see it kind of going that way. I do see progress. I am incredibly optimistic about the future. And what I do think is that if, in fact, I'm wrong, and there is a God, which actually my position isn't necessarily that there isn't a God, it's that there's no good reason. What I'm optimistic about is that these people who have divorced themselves from the more traditional literalist readings and have branched out, they're the ones that are more likely to come up with a demonstration that confirms the existence of God. But I don't think that's ever going to happen. And the reason is the model of God that they have in their head, the God of Christianity. If we were to confirm it, let's say, in 500 years, that's an absurd proposition given the amount of time that people lived and died without a sound, rational justification. And that's a big problem for the model. It ends up rendering it all absurd. I hope that answered your question.
Hi, can I get a quick mic check? Test 1, 2. Thank you. Matt, thank you very much for coming. I'm a theist, by the way. And this is a good segue to that last answer. It has to do with the world of science, and it has to do with you mentioning that you are a critical thinker. So I wonder what you do when two pieces of science don't add up, they don't mesh. For example, whale evolution. So someone is bugging me here. Anyways, whale evolution. So we think we have it pretty well figured out, where whales evolved from a wolf-like creature into a fully marine mammal, modern whale-looking beast in about 9 to 10 million years. Okay, and we have transitionals that fall in between those two extremes. That is the early whale-like creature that looks more like a wolf and the final product. But then we get a paper, right, headed up by or written by a Richard Steinberg, who holds a PhD in biology from Florida and a systems science PhD in theoretical biology from Birmingham University. And he has a paper that suggests that while that transition from wolf-like to fully marine mammal would have taken perhaps thousands of mutations, he works in a field called population genetics, which takes into account probable populations, probable breeding populations within that population, known mutation rates, etc., and suggests that that transition, given if it required only 12 mutations over the 9 million years, 12 mutations to get from that wolf-like creature to final marine whale-looking creature, would have taken in the neighborhood of 160 million years, not 9 million years. And that's just assuming it takes 12 mutations to get from that dog-like creature to aquatic mammal. So I wonder, you suggested you're a critical thinker, but what do you do with those two pieces of science that don't seem to mesh together? I'll yield the mic.
Sure, thanks for asking. First of all, not a scientist. And one of the key things that I'll point out is that any position that I have, as with any scientific position, is tentative. And so it's based on whichever model best fits the evidence. And the goal is to have the models match as accurately to reality as possible. So when we get to a spot where maybe two pieces of evidence don't add up, first of all, I'd say that I don't know that it's necessarily fair to characterize this particular situation as two pieces of evidence. What we have is a model about whale evolution that is supported by a whole bunch of evidence that may not necessarily be correct, but the model seems to hold. And as you pointed out, a paper claiming that the timeline doesn't work out. Now, I'm not familiar with the paper, and I'm not a scientist, but I would think that what would need to be done is that paper would be submitted for peer review. This potential problem would be investigated, and eventually we would find out whether or not our model needed revision. And so I don't really see this as a problem. I see this as science doing what it's supposed to do, which is, if we're making broad assertions that we know the history of whale evolution, I think we're making a mistake. But by saying that we have a really good understanding of whale evolution, that we have a good model that's supported by a bunch of evidence, but there's a paper here claiming that maybe the timeline doesn't work out or anything else, then at most we can say is this is the current consensus opinion that is best supported by the evidence. And we continue investigating. Science doesn't stop. It's not like, oh, yeah, we've discovered it all and we've got it all right. I mean, that's never going to happen. We need to find out, is this paper correct? Is the model that he's used to do this, is it correct? It wouldn't be the first time, and whales is a really good example of this. It wouldn't be the first time that we found out that what we thought the ancestry of a species isn't actually correct. But that's improving the model. That's improving the broader theory of evolution. It's not like if we found out that our understanding of whale evolution was incorrect, that it would overturn all of evolution. And by the way, even if we overturn all of evolution today and find out that we were wrong about all of it, which is preposterous, but it still wouldn't lend one bit of credence to the idea of creationism. That's a separate proposition that needs its own supporting evidence, and simply showing that something else is false doesn't show that yours is true. So the best answer I can give you is that I don't have a really good understanding of whale evolution. I've never spent any real time studying whale evolution other than, passing comments along here. And so I don't have any really strong opinions on this. I don't have faith in the scientists because I'm not asserting that I know the history of whale evolution. But I do have confidence in the process, and that if it's possible for us to actually discover an answer, then the best, single most consistently reliable pathway to discovering that explanation is through the scientific process of developing hypothesis, testing, submitting to peer review, etc., and then restructuring the model as we need to better fit the data. I hope that was a good enough answer for you.
Hi, I wanted to say I watched the Atheist Experience show. I like it a lot. I hear at the end of the show, a lot of the times you mention doing a meet and greet at the end of the show, and I cringe a little bit because I actually worry about your safety when it comes to being a public speaker. A lot of people find your ideas very threatening, and we know Richard Dawkins gets death threats and stuff like that. And so I'm wondering if you've had any kind of bad experiences or someone's accosted you or something at these meet and greets, or maybe a funny story or something you could share. That's it.
Yeah, so thanks for the question and thanks for the concern about my well-being. I used to joke that I wouldn't do this show in Lubbock, Texas, but actually I'm pretty sure that I would. I just might actually have to hire bodyguards. Yes, there have been occasional death threats. Certainly there have been a handful of threats of violence, but I've been doing the show for 8 years, and we're talking about less than 5, maybe, well, probably a couple more. There was one guy who persistently called, but certainly less than 5 serious threats, and probably only 1 or 2 that were of any real concern. And when we get those threats, we do what anybody else would or should do, which is we report them to the police and the FBI. But I run around town. The funny story, which thanks for reminding me, is somebody called the show. We do the show, for those who don't know, it's a live call-in show on Sunday afternoons from 4:30 to 5:30, and we do it from the public access TV studio. The public access studios are dying. They were put on by the cable companies and the cities as a way to allow the community to produce television shows for the community. The internet is killing them off, as is funding. But we live in one of the towns that still allows it. So we do it from the public access studio. This is made clear on the website. We talk about it on the show, and plus if you're watching it, you're on channel 16 and you see all this is coming in. And somebody called the show and asked for directions to the studio so they could come down and kick my ass. Now, I go on the show. We're at the public access studio. The address is online. And I tell people we're going to be at Threadgill's after the show's over. We're going to be at the Dog and Duck on Thursday. I'll be giving this talk here. We're at the Austin History Center on the first or second Sunday of every month for a lecture series. My travels around town and outside of town are pretty well documented in public. I haven't really been afraid of the people who would call in to threaten. I'm far more concerned about the people who aren't going to call and give warning. I think a lot of the people who are calling in are doing it so they can hear themselves on the air, or so because the bluster is what they really like. And early on, I would pop back with glib responses of I'm sure Jesus is proud of you, and I'll go ahead and turn the other cheek and hang up. But I realize, I don't want to presume what everybody's religious beliefs are just because they happen to call in to talk about how they wanted to, except for the guy who said he wanted to punch me in my fat face for Jesus, in which case, obviously we know what his position was. And I don't think he's typical of any Christian. I spent 25 years in this, and I have, or actually more than that, and I have family and friends and ministers who are friends. I don't think Christians are stupid. I don't think they're evil, and I don't think that the threats are typical of this. And so, by and large, I think people are generally good, and I'm optimistic. If there was ever a serious threat, we would definitely take precautions. Sam Harris has bodyguards. Ian Hersey Lee definitely has bodyguards and has to. Richard Dawkins has been to town a couple times. We've done. I've gone out. I emceed a fundraising dinner for him, and then we also sat down and talked in a hotel and stuff. He's not surrounded by bodyguards, or at least if he was, they were invisible to me. And I don't think that there's as much serious threat of bodily harm as some people might suspect. And quite often, a lot of the people who are concerned about this live outside the United States and have a view of we're all gun-slinging, gun-toting, rootin'-tootin', murder capital of the world people, and there's great danger. And I don't think that's remotely the case. We haven't had any real incidents at dinner. Usually people who show up are generally friendly, and I've been recognized out on the town here in Austin, and it has almost been universally positive. It's very rare that anybody says anything negative. I've seen some people like point and whisper. And actually, I got recognized in the oddest way, and so I just have to say this because it was cool. Beth and I were taking our winter vacation. We went up to our relatives for Christmas, and we were driving down through Illinois, and we stopped at a rest area. And we walked in, and I was talking to Beth, and when we walked back out, there was a guy standing outside and said, "Are you Matt Dillahunty from the Atheist Experience?" He'd never seen the show, or didn't, but he recognized my voice from talking to Beth, and I was like, "Holy crap, this is just so weird," and I wasn't sure what to say, so I just said, "Yeah," because I'm honest, and turned out, he liked the show and wasn't actually going to punch me in the face for Jesus or anybody else. But thanks for the question.
Hey Matt, how's it going? Huge fan of the show. It's quite an honor. And just I guess to give you a big head, I hold you in almost the same regard as I do Christopher Hitchens. So, and as far as death threats and punching you in your fat face for Jesus, how Christian is that, right? I think just earlier before you came in the room, we were told how hateful and spiteful atheists are. So I'm just going to ask you a couple questions that have been asked in the room, Matt, because I know a lot of people either, have mic problems or, they don't want to key up for whatever reason. So 2 things. What gives you purpose in life, and how would you respond to people who say that, people become atheists to justify their immoral behavior, so they come up with arguments to deny the validity of the 10 Commandments and garbage like that. Mic free.
Cool, thanks. Sorry for the delay. The little button next to the "you're talking" wouldn't actually click. So yeah, thanks for asking questions that were coming from the room, because it's difficult for me to follow the scrolling stuff. It might be fun to just sit here and kind of read them all off at some point. I did notice a couple people, ironically, telling me what appeared to be that I just need to try harder, which I'm pretty sure I addressed earlier with "screw you, you don't know me." But thanks for the compliment. There's no reason to. I accept the kind words, but I'm nowhere near Hitchens. And I'm glad that some questions in the room got answered. So, what gives me purpose in life? There's actually a really good book by Johnson, who has run around taking pictures of atheists. Talking about a life filled with meaning and joy, and I did a video on this. So the video is available, and the book's going to be out soon. But I'll sum this up pretty quickly. I find this discussion about meaning and purpose rather peculiar, because the theist mindset, in particular the Christian one, is always one of you can't have any purpose if you don't have God. There was a caller to the show who said that if God didn't exist, she wouldn't have any reason to get up in the morning, and that just to me was so sad. And this idea that people want an externally imposed purpose or meaning. My life has whatever meaning and purpose I give it. That's exactly the way I would want it if it weren't true. But as far as I can tell, that's the truth. That's what there is. I not only don't need an externally motivated purpose, I don't want one. It'd be somebody dictating to you what your favorite flavor of ice cream is, or telling you what your major is going to be, or telling you who you have to marry. And that's the whole purpose. I thought, at least under Christian model, was the freedom to choose and not choose. And so if the purpose is freedom, then I'm exercising it, and I'm even under that particular theistic model. there are plenty of things in life that I find joyful, and I have hope everywhere. My life is vastly improved in almost every way after giving up my religious beliefs. I don't feel the need to meet somebody else's meaning or purpose. I've got my own. And one of them is to, enjoy life and educate people, try to help people maybe not spend 30 years or 25 to 30 years in religion as I did. To the people who say that you just become a short version of what you asked. Well, if that was true, so what? I mean, quite honestly, we talk about the intellectual arguments for the existence of God and the intellects for being an atheist, and I think all those are valuable. I spend a lot of time on them. I'm doing another debate here in October on morality in Reno, Nevada. But the truth is, some people do give up their religious beliefs because they want to sin. And I reject the notion of sin. I find it completely absurd, this idea that that thoughts are crimes, that desires themselves instead of the actual actions are somehow wrong, that two people consenting and doing something that they both find pleasurable that doesn't affect other people, but because it's a crime against God, have done something wrong. I find that to be patently absurd. And when you think about, for example, the people, we'll just go with homosexuals because it's an easy example, in that if you're a Christian, if you're a theist of some stripe, and you find out that you are a homosexual, when you become aware of this, not when you, quote, choose it, as some people would say, and you decide to give up your religious beliefs because it's in opposition to who you fundamentally are, good for you. It's nice to have rational, evidence-based positions, but we ought not deny who we are as well. And so if somebody tells me, yeah, the church used to tell me that I couldn't have sex until I was married, and that just didn't make sense to me, and I'm a responsible individual who's taken the precautions and has thought about this, and I think the church is wrong on this, and so I'm not going to be a member of that religion that tries to tell me that who I am fundamentally is wrong without a demonstration. You want to demonstrate that what I'm doing is wrong, by all means I will stop it. But if you just want to assert that it's wrong, and if your justification for asserting that it's wrong is because it violates the will of some God, well, who cares? So I don't think we need to shy away from this, the fact that some people, and probably quite many, may begin down a road away from religion for reasons that are not rational, that are emotional, that are about who we are. That doesn't mean they're wrong. And that later on, many of them find more rational reasons, and it becomes clear why this stuff didn't make sense to them in the first place, because it's not true. There's no good reason to think that it's true, and people run around making assertions about what people should and shouldn't do. That's not morality. See, I gave a talk about the superiority of secular morality, and I'm going to have to, if I give the talk again, I'm going to change it a little bit, because, and I did when I gave it in San Diego. It's not that secular morality is superior. It's the only moral system there is. Religions don't have moral systems. They make moral pronouncements, and that's a very different thing. But in my case, and I can't speak for anybody else, anybody who thinks that I gave it up just so I could be immoral in sin is bizarrely misinformed. Because first of all, I was far more immoral for some period of time while I was a Christian. I was not always super Christian. I was definitely backslidden and spent a few years, drinking and partying and doing all sorts of other things that I knew, according to my teachings of Christianity, were wrong. But I'm a better person in general because I don't have to fall for this love the sinner, hate the sin crap. I can just love people. So, next.
Okay. We're going to let Blake go next because he's a guest. We brought him in to ask you a question. He's a Christian. He's a Christian apologist, so he's going to be taking the next mic. or the mic next, and then it will go back to Shotgun, who has already asked a question. But someone in the room who is part of our room, his mic isn't working, and he wants me to ask you real quick, what's your most favorite debate that you've ever had, and why? And that question came from Noctambulant Joycian. I pass the mic. And after you answer that, it will be Blake's turn.
Hey, Matt, you don't have the mic. You want to try that again?
Okay, the little button said you're talking, but I'm going to look for the green border up here. So I don't actually know what my favorite debate would be. I think I probably would go for the first big public debate I did, and the reasons were because it was the first big one, because I was surprised by the attendance, and because the Orthodox priest that I was debating was a new outlook for me. You know, having come from Southern Baptist and dealing with a lot of fundamentalists and stuff, debating an Orthodox priest was interesting. I actually enjoy the conversations and everything, but also because of what happened. And the curious thing is that he spent the entire debate agreeing with me, because it was about morality. You know, can you be good without God? And agreeing that yes, of course you can. And yes, he agreed that you could have sound secular justifications for moral positions. And I was sitting there baffled that he was agreeing with me through this debate and talking about how I was an honest seeker and how, you know, he and I could go out and have a beer and talk. And then when we got to his closing remarks, which were going to be he went last, so I wasn't going to get a chance to respond. It was like a Jekyll and Hyde routine. It was like somebody else came up and said, you know, our morals necessarily lead to gulags and eugenics and Nazis, and then went on a rant about porn. It just all out of the blue. It was the most bizarre thing ever. And I'm sitting there and I'm crushed because I've put together what I think is a really a good defense of secular morality. I've got my opponent here who's been agreeing with me throughout, and I'm like, wow, maybe I should hang with more Orthodox folks because we pretty much agree. And then, holy crap, there was just the most amazing switch flipped ever. And the other reason that I really like it is like the second or third person to ask a question pretty much asked, hey, what did you think of his closing? So that I could point out that no, in fact, we would not be going out for a beer because there's no way I could drink with somebody who would do something so utterly dishonest and try to claim, you know, the atheist Nazi stuff as a closer after agreeing with me for a whole debate. I think we're on to Blake, so let me get off the mic here.
Cool. I haven't been on PalTalk for a while, so can everyone hear me? Okay, awesome. Well, hey, Matt, man, thanks for coming out. Obviously, everyone is really excited to have you here, and I'm one of them. And I think I'm being rushed up, I suppose, because I don't know if I have that for you, but I do have what might be a good starting topic if we ever did get into a back and forth. And it's something that you can at least give your thoughts on, and I can give mine. And it's basically this. It has to do with the question of the so-called presumption of atheism. So just for a moment here, let me use atheism to denote the belief that God doesn't exist. And the idea behind this question is, which view should get benefit of the doubt? If we're considering this proposition, God exists, should we believe that it's true? Does that get benefit of the doubt before we examine any evidence? Or should we believe that proposition's false? Or should we be agnostic? And there's kind of reasons to take each of those seriously. I mean, with respect to any proposition, you'd almost instinctively want to say that you should be agnostic before looking at the evidence. But on the other hand, you want to look at a lot of existence claims, and you sort of have this Occam's razor thinking, well, if you're making a positive existence claim, then you should presume the thing doesn't exist unless you've got evidence for it. And then finally, you've got some reasons to think that there are things that exist despite this fact, and that's what I want to camp out on a bit. So just to clarify again, the question is which of these positions is it rational to give benefit of the doubt prior to examining evidence? And my view is that in the case of theism, we actually should give theism benefit of the doubt. And this might sound really odd at first, but let me give you some examples of other things that we give benefit of the doubt, and then I'm going to say why. And then we'll see a connection about how it applies to theism. So consider solipsism. Solipsism is, or at least one kind, is this view that really no other people exist. I'm it. And it may seem like other people exist, but really this is just an illusion. One way to think about it is as if I'm dreaming right now. It's just that I have nothing to wake up to. This is it. Nobody else exists. And this is possible, and in fact you can't disprove it with evidence. You can't even give evidence against it, because anything you try to proffer as evidence against solipsism just gets incorporated into this, falls under the broad category of so-called egocentric predicaments or philosophical skepticisms. And really what it boils down to is people just reject solipsism because they intuitively grasp that it's just ridiculous, that it's just false. And that applies to a lot of things that we believe. For instance, our belief that the laws of physics will hold tomorrow. You might think that you can get that through induction, but there's this so-called problem of induction, this Humean problem, that's well known, and you can't get out of it very easily without appealing to induction, and it turns into a big circle. So there are actually a number of beliefs that we just take for granted, and it seems that with respect to these beliefs, the reason we assign a high prior probability to them is just that they seem intuitive to us. So with that in mind, I want to suggest that theism is intuitive in the same way that the belief in an external world is intuitive. So these belong in the same category, and just like my belief that solipsism is false, or that an external world exists, or that the laws of physics will hold tomorrow, or that my memory is at least somewhat reliable, or that there is a past, actually, all these things are like another belief, namely that God exists. Beliefs, and it would put them in a category of beliefs that get benefit of the doubt. And so I'm going to finish by just reading a quote from a recent study that does indicate that belief in God does fit this category. And if that's correct, and if you've granted my other premises, then it would suggest that theism gets benefit of the doubt, and it's actually the non-theist or the atheist who bears the burden. He's the one that needs to give us good reasons to think God doesn't exist. So I'll read two quotes. One is just from Science Daily, and I can give you the link. This is my favorite popular science. The $1.9 million project involved 50 studies in 20 countries, representing a diverse range of cultures. These studies, both analytical and empirical, concluded that humans are predisposed to believe in gods and an afterlife, and that both theology and atheism are reasoned responses to what is a basic impulse of the human mind. And here's the final... Okay, I'm hearing overtime. I thought I'd get more time than normal, but maybe I'm wrong. Alright, I won't read the second one then. But there you go. Looking forward to your thoughts, and thanks again for coming.
Okay, mic's on. Cool. Although I'm getting an echo. Anyway, thanks, Blake. So you were evidently supposed to ask me a really hard question. If you had, I would have just said, I don't know. Because I'm okay with I don't know, and that's important. I'm okay with saying, I don't know the answer, but let's see if we can actually go find out. I can tell you what my views and my opinions are. I can tell you what I believe to be true or most likely true. But, you ask me something I don't know, I don't know. But on the presumption of atheism, I think there's a little bit of confusion here, and you're going to think that I've gone off track, but I will get back to it, I promise. I've used the courtroom analogy in the past to talk about the burden of proof, and that's kind of what you're talking about with the presumption of atheism. You said, basically you were going to say the atheism being the belief that God doesn't exist, which isn't the atheism that I'm defending or offering up. We evaluate claims independently. So there are two possible options Either some God exists or no God exists. Those are the two mutually exclusive options. But we only address one of them at a time. And so that's where this presumption of atheism comes in, much the same way that courts of law only address the issue of guilt, a claim of guilt. They don't address a claim of innocence, and juries don't vote innocent. They either are convinced of guilt or they are not convinced of guilt. And my position is that the claim that we are addressing is that a God exists, and I'm finding God not guilty of existence. Now, if you want to call that the presumption of atheism in as analogous to presumption of innocence, okay with that. I'm fine with that. But I'm in complete agreement with you. I'm in partial agreement with you that there is no current solution to hard solipsism. I think I have a potential solution, but it's not a real one. It's just kind of one thing that I've come up with that I found interesting, and that is that if solipsism is true, then I have created every wonderful and beautiful thing that has ever existed, and I have done every monstrous thing that has ever existed, and existed is the wrong word for this, but I'm sure you get what I'm saying. Written every poem and every song, and I have somehow simultaneously believed and disbelieved everything, which I think violates the laws of logic, but at a minimum demonstrates that I am a very, very screwed up brain, which may be the case. But I'll go ahead and grant that there's no current solution for hard solipsism. But I reject your claim that we tend to reject solipsism based on an intuition that it's just false. That's not why I reject solipsism. I reject solipsism as a practical necessity. Even if it's true that I am the only mind, I'm still stuck dealing with the reality that I actually perceive until such time as somebody offers me a way out, or I find a way out on my own. But it's a practical necessity that I am stuck operating as if solipsism weren't true. Now, I don't accept this intuitive argument that we intuit that solipsism is false, and therefore we should intuit that theism is true and have it benefit from the burden of, have the burden of proof benefit theism. Because I don't do it intuitively, I do it as a practical necessity, and I don't find that belief in God is a practical necessity at all. Intuition is not the criteria for which I base my positions. So there are two possibilities: either some God exists or no God exists. And I didn't begin with a presumption of either of them, although I am a fan of the idea that if we're going to be intellectually rigorous, the existence of something is that which would bear the burden of proof. Now, how big of a burden that is depends very much on the claim. You tell me you have a pet dog, I'm willing to believe that pretty much on your say-so. You tell me you have a pet invisible dragon, I'm not willing to believe that on your say-so. By and large, when we're talking about the existence of an agent, we presume that the agent, we need some evidence to support the idea that the agent actually exists. It's not a matter of intuition to me, it's a matter of practical necessity. I see no practical reason to think that it's necessary for anybody to believe in a God. And we'll go back to the Laplace's statement of when asked why he didn't include God in his calculations, and saw no need to include a God. I don't either. When I look at the universe, I don't see anything that makes me even intuitively think that there is a God. And when I examine the various claims about God, what I find is that people's intuitions about God, when we can actually confirm the truth, are demonstrably incorrect over and over again. And that this is a product of people looking for answers or being uncomfortable with not knowing, positing the existence of a God, and then we later find out that, that actually wasn't the cause that we're looking for. So I don't see what the justification could be. You quoted a study that humans are predisposed to belief. I think I have a problem with that study in the sense that I'm not sure that humans are predisposed to belief in a God. I think humans are predisposed to beliefs that can result in believing in a God as a side effect, none of which tells us what is actually true. And so if you ask me, do I think, am I willing to bet my life? No, I'm operating based on the best reasonable evidence. And if you ask me if I'm willing to bet my life that a God exists, no. And that's what, or that a God doesn't exist. No, that's not the way I look at things. And certainly, if we're going to establish a burden of proof, and you want to claim that theism gets the benefit of the doubt, I don't accept what you've offered so far. If you come up with something else, maybe I might be convinced of that. But this seems to be based on the idea that, we can find these other things that we believe for no good reason, so we can go ahead and include God in this for no good reason as well. I want to believe things for good reasons, and I think that the practical necessity is a good enough reason to go ahead and accept, to operate as if solipsism were false, whether it is or not. But next. Actually, let's just do two more, and then I'm going to have to go.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to piggyback off of Blake G's question, but before I do, I had another really quick question, so I hope you guys forgive me for two quick questions. The first question I have is when the chatter named Alex got to the microphone and asked about the whales, in other words, when there are two seemingly conflicting bits of scientific propositions, then you are okay to say, well, let the scientists be scientists and let the scientists do their job and come up with some sort of peer-reviewed process, some sort of rigorous study to hammer out the supposed contradiction. And that's all well and good, but I'm just wondering, it sounds like that you're not willing to give Christian theologians the same opportunity. In other words, if there are two seemingly contradictory theistic propositions, you're not willing to let theologians be theologians and hammer that out and work through it. Instead, you said earlier that they need to just stop at that point and give up their Christianity. So that's the first question, and I appreciate you answering that. The second question I have really quick is I was reading the philosopher William P. Alston's book on the reliability of sense perceptions, and this piggybacks on what Blake G was saying. According to Alston, there is no good empirical way to justify the reliability of sense perceptions. And as you said, you don't know the truth or falsity of solipsism. Do you know? I mean, can you refute global skepticism in the same way? Do you know that your sense perceptions are justified? And if you do, how do you know that? And if you can't know it, then how do you know that God is any more or less likely than the fact that we're having a conversation right now? Thank you. And thanks again for being here, Mr. Dillahunty. I yield the mic.
Okay, so two questions that are probably going to take me a couple minutes. So the first one, I don't know that your characterization that I imply that theologians should just stop and give up their Christianity. If their version of Christianity has not met its burden of proof, then I think they should give it up. But that doesn't mean I think they should stop. I'm okay with letting a scientist do their job. My position is that I don't know, and I'm more than willing to let theologians do their job, but my confusion is, what exactly is their demonstrated expertise? So far as I can tell, theologians have demonstrated an expertise in nothing. There's been no demonstration that they're even studying anything real, no demonstration that they have any mechanism for demonstrating the truth of their propositions. It seems to be a vain exercise, and it seems that they've skipped a few steps in order to even get started. And I would recommend that maybe they should have to go back a couple of steps to demonstrate that what they're investigating is even real, or that there's any good reason to think that their investigations could be fruitful. And what theologians are doing isn't, so far as I can tell, science or scientific. It is perhaps somewhat philosophical with respect to religious claims. It is perhaps includes some aspects of history, but not in, I'm not saying you got to put God in a beaker. I'm talking about the actual methodology that they use. get people talking about hermeneutics and exegesis, etc., and that's great, and all sorts of models for studying literature and Bayesian analysis to determine probability of things. Awesome. I don't know that I see theologians actually doing that. Now, it may be that I'm uninformed or underinformed, but I definitely don't see that they've made any demonstration that their field is actually real any more than, Reiki or aromatherapists are engaged. Actually, probably aromatherapists and Reiki have a better demonstration that they're at least dealing with something real. When it comes to your question about the reliability of sense perception, I reject, generally speaking, the idea of the senses as properly basic. I don't assume that the senses are necessarily reliable. The reliability of senses is something that I think we can test. So you put this, sorry, I'm not advertising, you put this drink in front of me. The way that I go about investigating this, I don't just look at it and assume that this sense of visual perception is correct. The combined verification of my senses and the verification of other senses, assuming that they exist. Yes, I realize I'm still getting those through my senses. That's where we determine exactly how reliable the senses are. We're so good at it, as a matter of fact, that we can detect people whose senses aren't in fact reliable. Now, in the lower level sense of how do I know that what's getting into my brain is reliable? I don't. I already acknowledge that I don't have any solution for hard solipsism, which I, by the way, include in the brain in a vat models and matrix models and things like that New Evil Demon, etc., that would challenge the reliability of my senses. But I have a practical necessity that I have to operate with what's coming in through my senses until there's a demonstration that they're not. This burden of proof here shifts to prove that what I'm receiving is false because I have no other option, not because I've intuited that my senses are reliable and not because I've just flatly determined that they're reliable. This is what I'm stuck with. If it turns out tomorrow I'm in the Matrix, cool. Well, not cool, but you know what I mean. Anyway, I hope that got to your question, and this will be the last one.
G0, we don't hear you. Please try to come up one more time. Mike's free.
Okay. Got audio now? Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. Make it real quick. Watched the show, big fan. Had a kind of similar ex-Baptist process that ended up in atheism. But that process was kind of long and hard and kind of difficult and kind of confusing. And that's why I take issue with your kind of positive, only two options, that you're either a theist or an atheist and that there's no in between. I think there's a third possibility, and that possibility is not agnosticism, which I know so many people go to you. I understand the difference. But I still suggested to you that there's a third position, and it's confusion. And so I think that you can actually be in a position where you really don't know what you believe. And it was kind of difficult for me for many years. And so I just want to point out that, I take an affront to your idea that you have to be one or the other, that it's a digital type of situation. And since you're so good at handling multiple questions, one more quick one, Matt. Since you can't take any calls to action over the air from your public access TV, could you take a few minutes and maybe take a call to action here where you're perfectly free to do so? Thanks for coming. Mike is free.
Let me hit your second one first. Thanks so much for the question. As far as calls to action, yeah, there's there's stuff we can't do. We can't say come down and join us at Threadkills. We can't say buy so and so's book. I don't actually have anything that I want to pimp or call people to action, other than first of all, if you're on the atheist side of things, get involved. And obviously you guys are all involved to some extent in this, but I would say that I don't know how many of you are involved outside of the internet, but I would encourage people to actually do that. We are social animals, and even I know there's some people who are antisocial and still want to help out. That's awesome. But get to know some. I hear from people a lot who are saying, "Oh, I'm the only atheist in my neighborhood or in my town," and that's just not true. And it's cool to meet people on the internet and do those things, but I'd like to see more people participating out in meet space as much as possible. So, your other question, I think I've found the source of our disagreement, and this may be pretty easy. My position that you either believe or do not believe is based entirely on the logical absolutes. Your statement that there's a third option of confusion is, irrelevant, because I'm not claiming that you actually know which state that you're in. You are either convinced of something or you're not. But if you're confused, that is either something that I would say does not qualify for I am convinced this is true, because the belief, the convincement is a positive position that you have become convinced of this. And up until the time that you are convinced, you're unconvinced. And that's how I'm dividing the terms between belief is the state of being convinced that it's true, and disbelief is the state where you're not convinced. So if you're confused, you're clearly not convinced. It's a fact that you either believe or don't believe. But whether or not you're aware of what your belief or lack of belief is, and not lack of belief, but disbelief, is a separate issue. So it's kind of a meta level. So here's what I believe, here's what I know, or here's what I'm aware that I believe. And so I think that's kind of where the line is on that. I apologize. I think we did a little over an hour and a half or so, and I'd be happy to come back and do it again sometime. Thanks to everybody who asked questions. And I mean everybody. I enjoyed Blake's question. I have a lot of conversations that fall into those philosophical realms, and I don't get to do it enough because, quite frankly, in the show I'm more likely to get hit with Pascal's wager or the Kalam from somebody who doesn't even understand the first premise of Kalam or how it came to be. But there were a lot of good questions, a lot of things to think about. I'm not claiming to be an expert in anything except me, and I might not even be the foremost expert on me. So thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate all the questions, and hope to come back sometime.
Well, Matt, I just want to thank you for coming, and I hope you give 1 second for Bakian, who owns the room, to come and thank you too. Maybe we can get you to come back and tell your television audience to come join you here and chat with you live. That's something that I think PalTalk offers that we can't get anywhere else. But I will get in touch with you about trying to reschedule you to come back, and just thank you again for coming. You were a great speaker, and I appreciate it. Mic is free. Go ahead, Bach.
Yeah, thanks for coming. It was great having you. And Wanda will stay in touch with you, and that you have her email. And if you can, give us a shout out on your radio show, and we could always use more members here. So thanks for coming, and I hope to see you again soon. I think you were probably, in my opinion, the best speaker we've had yet, and we've had some pretty good speakers. So I thought tonight was great. So thanks for coming, man. It was awesome.
I guess I'm going to jump back in one real quick. Thanks, everybody, again. I did tweet this out ahead of time, so everybody involved in the show knows I can't actually pimp PalTalk and the channel on the TV show, but I did tweet it out. And I'll get you some recommendations for some other people who might like to come do this and be even better at it than I was. But thanks, everybody.